For 70 years, NATO's strategic dominance shaped the global balance of power. It was an intricate system of military alliances, intelligence networks, and diplomatic influence, carefully crafted over decades to ensure its superiority on the world stage. No one questioned its strength, its resilience, or its ability to maintain order in an ever-changing world. But everything changed with one decisive move. Your move. In an instant, you shattered the foundation that NATO had built, rendering its decades of planning and power meaningless. What was once considered NATO's secret weapon has now been exposed as obsolete, a relic of a bygone era. The strategies that sustained it for so long are now irrelevant, and the balance of power has shifted in a way that no one could have predicted. History is being rewritten, and you are the one who will be remembered for turning the page. Before we dive deeper into this unprecedented shift, take a moment to pause and hit that like button, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, and leave a message for them in comments. This small action will send a powerful signal, amplifying the energy of what's unfolding right before your eyes. What was once unshakable is now in ruins, and the world will never be the same. For 7 long decades, NATO held a commanding grip on global affairs, becoming the undeniable symbol of military strength and strategic unity. The alliance's power wasn't merely a result of numbers. It was the intricate web of alliances, military superiority, and covert intelligence operations that ensured its place at the top. Every move, every strategy was meticulously planned, and the world watched in awe as NATO maintained a rock-solid defense against any potential threat. Nations trusted it, feared it, and above all, respected it. The history of NATO was written in ink, and for a long time, it seemed that nothing could erase its legacy of invincibility. But all that power, all that influence, was built on a foundation of assumptions that no one ever thought would be challenged. NATO's strategic brilliance, while revolutionary at its inception, began to show signs of wear. The global order had changed, but NATO's playbook had stayed largely the same. Technological advancements, shifting alliances, and rising new powers posed challenges that the old guard wasn't equipped to handle. Still, NATO remained the epitome of defense, its military machine constantly fine-tuned to perfection, its strategy seemingly flawless. To question NATO was unthinkable until one person, one strategic disruption, would change the course of history. The world may have believed that NATO's dominance was eternal, an unmovable force that would shape the planet for generations to come. Yet history has a way of proving even the most dominant forces fallible. What began as a fortress of certainty and control soon turned into a powder keg waiting to explode. The challenge wasn't just external, but internal. NATO's complacency and its inability to adapt swiftly to the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape set the stage for an unimaginable collapse. It wasn't just a shift in power. It was a complete overturn of everything NATO had ever stood for. You didn't just challenge NATO, you broke its foundation. In an instant, the delicate balance it had carefully constructed for decades crumbled. The years of carefully orchestrated military superiority, the strategic partnerships, and the unwavering belief in NATO's invincibility vanished in the blink of an eye. It wasn't a slow fade or a drawn-out process. It was a single, calculated action that ripped through the heart of NATO's dominance, revealing the cracks that had always been there but were hidden beneath layers of strategy and secrecy. The truth was undeniable. NATO's dominance was no longer unquestionable. The once proud institution that had shielded the West from countless threats now found itself exposed. It was as if a mirror had been held up, and the world saw NATO for what it truly was. Not an unbreakable force, but a vulnerable entity that had been living on borrowed time. Your actions didn't just alter history, they erased a 7-decade-long narrative of invulnerability. NATO had always been the backbone of Western power, the ultimate safeguard against any force that sought to upset the global order. For generations, it was the go-to guarantor of security, the iron wall behind which nations sought refuge. Its military capabilities, coupled with its intelligence infrastructure, created a powerful deterrent to any adversary. The alliance seemed untouchable, operating with the confidence of a heavyweight champion who had never lost a match. In the eyes of the world, NATO was synonymous with strength, unity, and stability. But behind the scenes, cracks had started to appear in this seemingly impenetrable structure. Political tension within the alliance, differing national interests, and an increasingly complex international landscape made it harder for NATO to maintain the level of cohesion that had made it so formidable. The geopolitical landscape was shifting, and NATO's response was often reactive rather than proactive. As the years went on, NATO's once unified front began to show signs of fragmentation. The very foundation of its global power was eroding, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but unmistakably so. Then everything changed. One decisive move shattered what had once been considered NATO's unshakable backbone. In an instant, the world witnessed the collapse of an empire that had taken nearly a century to build. It was no longer a matter of internal disagreements or external pressure. It was a sudden and catastrophic shift that left NATO reeling. The power that NATO once wielded was now a mere shadow of itself, unable to respond with the same force it had relied upon for so long. The balance of global power had tilted, and NATO's influence had crumbled. This wasn't just a blow to NATO, it was a wake-up call for the entire world. For those who had relied on NATO as the ultimate guarantor of security, the realization was jarring. The institution that had been the cornerstone of Western defense was now revealed as vulnerable. What had once been a seamless network of power, strategy, and intelligence was now scattered and fragmented. The collective confidence in NATO's ability to safeguard global peace was shattered, replaced by uncertainty and doubt. It wasn't just a matter of military might anymore. NATO's strength had always been in its alliances, in its unity. But that unity had fractured, and with it, the very core of NATO's power. The world was left to grapple with the aftermath of this collapse, trying to comprehend what came next. The certainty of the past had vanished, replaced by a new reality where NATO's place in the global order was no longer guaranteed. NATO's military superiority was often seen as the ultimate trump card. For decades, the alliance's arsenal of sophisticated weaponry, advanced technology, and highly trained forces kept its adversaries at bay. From the Cold War to modern conflicts, NATO's military dominance had been a defining feature of its global influence. The sheer scale of its resources made it an unrivaled force on the world stage, a true military juggernaut. And yet, all of that military might was brought to its knees by a single, masterfully executed move. This wasn't just a military defeat in the conventional sense. It was an unraveling of NATO's most potent weapon, its reputation for invincibility. One action exposed the fragility beneath the surface, revealing how outdated strategies, entrenched bureaucracies, and the reliance on conventional warfare tactics had left NATO ill-prepared for the new era of conflict. What was once the epitome of military supremacy now seemed obsolete in the face of an adversary who understood the power of disruption. This moment of reckoning didn't happen in the battlefield, but in the minds of those who had placed their faith in NATO's might. The world watched as NATO's once unquestionable superiority was upended. It wasn't a matter of strength versus strength. It was about how strategic innovation could outpace brute force. You demonstrated that the world had changed and the old methods no longer applied. NATO had been living in the past, and that past came crashing down in an instant. For years, NATO had been able to dictate the terms of global defense, but that control, once so carefully guarded, evaporated with a single, unexpected strike. It wasn't just a victory in the traditional sense. It was the death of an era. NATO's military superiority had been reduced to nothing more than a symbol of the past, a relic of a bygone age when power was defined by sheer force rather than adaptability, innovation, and agility. This strategic move wasn't just about breaking NATO's military might. It was about showing the world that there were new rules to the game. The old ways of conflict, rooted in the belief that military power alone could guarantee success, were no longer sufficient. The shift in global power had already begun, and NATO, once the supreme power in military strategy, was left behind. For years, NATO's secret weapon was its ability to strike fear into the hearts of adversaries with its vast network of intelligence operations. This shadowy web of surveillance, espionage, and covert missions was as much a part of NATO's power as its military capabilities. It wasn't just about having the strongest army. It was about knowing everything, being everywhere, and ensuring that no surprise could ever threaten the alliance's security. NATO's intelligence apparatus was the envy of the world. And, for good reason, it kept NATO one step ahead, always prepared for the next move. Or so it seemed. But you exposed something that NATO's secret weapon had overlooked. The power of unpredictability. While NATO's intelligence network was vast, it was ultimately constrained by its reliance on traditional methods of gathering and processing information. In a rapidly changing world where digital warfare and cyber attacks had become as important as physical ones, NATO's old-school intelligence strategies were increasingly ineffective. Your actions revealed a new kind of warfare, one that NATO's intelligence services were not prepared for. In the face of such disruption, NATO's once powerful network of espionage and covert operations crumbled. The age of secrets, of hidden powers, was replaced by an age of transparency and openness, where the old tools of power were no longer enough. You showed that intelligence was no longer about secrecy. It was about speed, innovation, and adaptability. NATO's reliance on outdated strategies rendered its once invincible intelligence system obsolete. The implications were profound. NATO had relied on its ability to gather information from every corner of the globe, but that information was no longer enough to stay ahead of the curve. The age of cyber warfare, of instantaneous communication and unpredictable moves had arrived. The very mechanisms that once gave NATO its edge had become its Achilles heel. It wasn't just about gathering data anymore. It was about being able to respond in real time, to move faster than the enemy, and to think in ways that went beyond traditional methods of espionage. NATO's secret weapon, its intelligence network, had been overtaken by the very forces it failed to anticipate. You demonstrated the critical flaw in NATO's intelligence infrastructure. It was built for a different era, a different kind of warfare. Now, in this new world, where the line between cyber and physical battlefields was blurred, NATO's reliance on old methods left it vulnerable. The secret weapon that had once struck fear into the hearts of adversaries was now a symbol of obsolescence. Your actions revealed how the world had changed, and how NATO, despite its power and history, had failed to evolve. NATO's fall from grace didn't just reverberate across military circles. It sent shockwaves through the very fabric of global geopolitics. For decades, NATO was the definition of invincibility. Its military prowess, diplomatic influence, and strategic alliances formed an unbreakable barrier against any challenge. But in a world where change is the only constant, even the most formidable structures are susceptible to collapse. NATO's sudden decline left the world reeling. What had once been seen as the ultimate force for stability became a symbol of vulnerability and outdated power. The immediate aftermath was a global recalibration. Countries that had placed their trust in NATO's security umbrella were now forced to question everything they had believed about their own safety. Allies began to look inward, wondering if their reliance on NATO had been a strategic mistake. The very concept of collective defense, which had once been the cornerstone of international security, was now up for debate. The world was no longer certain that NATO could guarantee its protection, and that uncertainty created a dangerous vacuum. This global shockwave wasn't limited to military powers. The economic ramifications were just as severe. NATO's decline didn't just alter the defense landscape, it undermined the economic policies tied to it. NATO's strategic dominance had long provided stability for international markets, secure trade routes, and global investments. With NATO's decline, a new wave of unpredictability took over, forcing countries and corporations alike to reevaluate their long-term strategies. The global economic order, once so dependent on NATO's stability, had been shaken to its core. It wasn't just a military setback, it was a seismic shift in the way nations viewed power. NATO had represented the apex of collective strength, but now its decline served as a cautionary tale about the fragility of any institution that believes it is invincible. The world watched as NATO's invincibility turned into irrelevance, and with that came the realization that the era of unquestioned power was over. The landscape of global security had been irrevocably altered. Now, nations everywhere must grapple with the aftermath of NATO's fall. The alliances that once formed the backbone of Western power are fractured, and the question remains: who will fill the void left by NATO? What does a new world order look like in a time when even the mightiest can fall? What you did wasn't just an act of disruption, it was a revelation. NATO, the institution that had been seen as the cornerstone of global security, had long been immune to questioning. The sheer weight of its legacy and its formidable military presence gave it the illusion of infallibility. But with one calculated move, you exposed the fatal flaws that had been lurking beneath the surface for decades. It wasn't about a weakness in its military or intelligence. It was the failure to adapt, the failure to foresee the changing nature of global conflict. NATO had been built on a model of power projection, where conventional warfare was the primary focus, and it relied heavily on outdated defense strategies. Yet the world had shifted. Hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, and economic coercion had become the new norms. NATO's reluctance to integrate these new forms of conflict into its strategy made it vulnerable. You demonstrated that a system that relied on old paradigms could not withstand the pressures of a new world order. It wasn't just about armies anymore. It was about agility, information, and adaptability. NATO had become a behemoth in a world that no longer had the patience for giants. Your action didn't just break the system, it revealed its cracks to the entire world. NATO's bureaucratic inertia, its reliance on conventional tactics, and its failure to respond quickly to new threats exposed its fragility. You showed that the biggest flaw was not in NATO's strength, but in its inability to embrace change. You didn't just defeat NATO's strategies, you highlighted the unsustainability of a worldview that believed military might alone could solve complex global challenges. The political and military elites, who had long believed in NATO's invulnerability, found themselves scrambling for answers. For decades, NATO had been the undisputed power, with its strategies and systems beyond reproach. But you shattered that illusion. You exposed NATO's inability to evolve, its dependence on outdated models, and its lack of foresight. This was a turning point, one that marked the beginning of the end for an era where brute strength was the measure of power. In that moment, the world realized that no institution, no matter how powerful, could survive the forces of change without adapting. NATO's failure to recognize this simple truth sealed its fate, and you, with your actions, became the catalyst for that transformation. There is a defining moment in history when everything changes. For NATO, that moment came when its power, once thought to be invincible, finally crumbled under pressure. This wasn't the slow erosion of influence over decades. It was a collapse that occurred almost overnight, leaving the world in shock. For years, NATO had prided itself on its military supremacy, its intelligence capabilities, and its strategic alliances. But when the pressure of new global realities mounted,